What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick.
I'm Jammin John.
And we have yet another album review for you, and one that, I don't know, we kind of just want to do another one to kind of round out this week. It was kind of slow, but this one came up, and honestly, I figured it'd just be kind of a good riffy time to go over, and I'd say we're really pretty much right on that one. So we're going to go over the latest offering from Castle, Evil Remains. This also comes out on the 6th of September on Hammerheart Records. This band formed in 2009 in both San Francisco and Toronto. So it's quite some distance there.
Yeah.
This is their 6th album overall. I got into them with their album Under Siege, which I think is their 3rd album. I admittedly have not listened to that one in quite a while. So when this one came up, I had to go through and wait, which Castle is this? Because there's actually a fair amount of bands named Castle. And for those that don't know, this is I guess you could say, heavy metal, doom metal sort of blend, a little bit of occult rock. The two main members of this band, one Elizabeth Blackwell on bass and vocals and Matt Davis on guitar, are pretty much the only ones that are, I believe, permanently in the band. They use a lot of session players, at least on drums. And again, it's been a while since I've gone over them, but revisiting this band, it's almost kind of like another perfect spooky season, kind of preamble for all the fun Halloween stuff coming, because this band loves Black Sabbath, Dio, name a band that Wino is in.
100%.
Stuff like that. And I would say that this band honestly just lives and dies by the riff.
I'd actually never heard this band, but I have heard this band, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but yeah. And I would say that this band is very appropriate for spooky season, but back in the 70s, when the costumes they had were actually probably pretty terrifying. The riffs are dark for the most part, yet fairly upbeat and rockin'. I don't know, we'll get into it.
Yeah, I mean, this band is definitely a blend of classic heavy metal and, I mean, doom metal feels right. I would also say stoner metal too. The production on here, I don't know, it kind of gives me all of those vibes. The production was done by Jesse Gander, which I didn't think to bring him up before because we just went over one of his production jobs with the new Ancients album. But since we had back-to-back ones, well, let's bring up this dude's production because it's awesome. It was awesome on the Ancients album, and it's awesome on here. The guitar tone on this album is great.
Yeah, it's perfect almost for what they're going for. I mean, I would call this more of a stoner vibe than I would a doom vibe. It's got some doom, but not a lot, but the guitar is perfect for it. It's a little bit warm, it's a little bit fuzzy, it's got a nice crunch to it, it fits in very nicely, and the drum mix, again, the drums sound like cannons. If you would have told me Kurt Ballou mixed the drums on this, I would have told you were correct. I swear that Jesse Gander and Kurt Ballou at least are friends or have talked before, because their drum mix is very, very similar.
The bass on here sounds great too, especially when they isolated the opening of Deja Voodoo. They do have fun with their song titles. But it's, again, warm, thick. For a technically 3-piece, because they do have a session drummer on here, it has a very full layered sound. And a lot of that does come from the guitars, whether it is a giant beefy riff, which you can just pick a song. You can just... that one.
Yep.
It has a giant riff on it. But there's frequently really haunting melodies over it, whether it's the guitars or the vocals on here, which her vocals in a way kind of remind me of Minnie Parsons from Royal Thunder, though she doesn't quite use the same range because Minnie Parsons has an exceptional range, but she has that same kind of delivery where it's a little bit gruff sounding, a little leather lunged, and that kind of makes the more low-end crooning sound a little bit spookier. A lot of the music on here, though, I would say draws a lot of comparisons to bands like Corrosion Conformity, of course, the later years, not the early punky years. The Sword, Obsessed, and again, just pick a wino band.
Yeah, pretty much.
The riff work alone, just those big, crunchy, just kind of classic sounding, simple meat and potatoes riffs that still just absolutely rock you. That is the kind of riff on virtually every song on here.
Yeah, think classic rock, but think if they beefed that guitar tone up a little bit more, because, a lot of classic rock, they hadn't really figured out how to chunkify things. It was mostly just a mid-range tone. It had a little crunch on it, a little warmth, but take those riffs and just chunkify them. And that's really every riff on this album.
I mean, the title track in particular, absolutely badass riff, good mid-tempo rocker, and they dry hump that thing. Like, they just keep rocking it out. It's got a great hook to it, and it's all, again, like, very classic sounding. Like, I would say this is, like, very retro in terms of, like, the style of music, but it's still kind of more modern in terms of the production. At its core, it is very based on just straight-up meat and tater riffs, but there's a lot of, like, clever accents and just stuff they kind of pepper in as additional seasoning just to kind of bring out the flavor in all these meat and tater riffs.
And speaking of seasoning, if we're talking about the drum work, it's not always like a straightforward rock groove. Like, don't get me wrong, there are just straightforward rock grooves in here. But sometimes it comes with a little bit of a swagger, maybe like a little like snare hitch or something. Songs like Nosferatu Nights and 100 Eyes, both of those songs just have kind of like a swing groove to them. It's really cool. Or even songs like She, which have an off-time groove in it. There are little things that they throw in to just further season the meat and taters. A little spice.
She, in particular, that one I would say is like notably more busy. Like, there's a lot of like different transitions in there. Honestly, it kind of reminds me more of like Baroness.
Yeah.
Definitely some Mastodon in there. And the transitions themselves, I think, are pretty clever. Again, at its core, very meat and potatoes, just straight up like riff and groove and let's just go. But there's some like fun, again, like off time patterns, some really interesting like crawling harmonies.
Yeah.
And, you know, like this kind of interesting kind of bouncing back and forth between tempos. Like, you get like an up tempo section and then it cuts it down to a halftime one. I don't know, like that song I just feel like is, you know, a little bit more adventurous, and it does kind of the most it can with, I would say, like, you know, very just kind of basic ingredients.
Yeah, it does the most it can with what it's given. Wild riff tags in She, too. There's a moment right before it goes into a double-time drum groove. That riff tag, I swear to God, is really awesome. And then, yeah, slowdown moments, like Queen of Death has this really cool, gradual slowdown. Like, you don't even notice it until you catch the fact that the tempo is a little bit different. But it was so fluid that it caught me off guard.
Honestly, probably one of the doomiest moments on here. Again, this is like kind of like a homogenized blend. You could even honestly call it like riff rock and you wouldn't be too far off base, which is definitely not a dig because, I mean, who doesn't love riffs? Besides people that don't love riffs, and we don't really talk to those people.
Right. We don't let those people in the house.
That's not right. It's like Yngwie Malmsteen not liking donuts. What the fuck? But with this band, like, it's clear that all of their influences are very classic. And some of them I just could not shake. Like, all right, Deja Voodoo, it almost sounds like a really spooky Dio song. Like, specifically, it reminded me of maybe like a couple of songs off of Strange Highways, which is kind of known as Dio's more doom-laden album. There's just an interesting contrast between the verses and the chorus. The verses are very downtrodden, sullen, spooky. She sings in a little bit lower register, and it's, you know, not quite a whisper, not quite a groan, but it's still very tuneful. And then when the chorus hits, I mean, it's just got some giant-sized Dio riffs on there, like classic heavy metal all over. There's even some stuff on here that reminds me of, you know, both, you know, Ozzy Black Sabbath and Dio Black Sabbath.
And there's even a couple really interesting surprises, one of which appears in Black Spell, which is just a fairly upbeat rocker, but there's death growls.
Yeah, like, I think maybe Matt, the guitarist, might be supplying some backup vocals, either that or Elizabeth has another register that she layers, because there's like some layered vocals on here, but sometimes, again, it's like more of this like kind of like groan, or I don't know if I'd call it a growl. Like, it kind of reminded me of like the vocals you'd hear on like Night, for anyone that's familiar with that band. If you're not, check them out, they're awesome. It's kind of like Lemmy, except he's got a cold, which doesn't sound that much different than like regular kind of Lemmy, because it's very gruff anyway, but it just sounds like a little bit more breathy. Black Spell in particular, I would say, is like probably the most high energy song here. Like, a lot of this album kind of lurks in a mid-tempo sort of range, which is great. This is like perfect headbanging music. But Black Spell is, I don't know, like there's a vibe on it where I feel like the entire song was written on the back of a motorcycle while they were riding through the highway.
Could be.
It has a leather-clad feel about it. It's chuggy, it's more up-tempo, like, I don't know, like the way the riff goes, it's almost like Symptom of the Universe a little bit.
A little bit. And the riffs are kind of sinister at times, too, which throws in another interesting hitch. But then I got reminded of Motley Crue, and the only reason I got reminded of Motley Crue is because this fucker in his ranking. It's got definitely a more classic rock vibe to it, but just a little darker. It's like they kind of flirt with that line of classic rock. Like, we could be upbeat, but here's a little bit darker of a riff to just kind of remind you that we're not.
It's to the point where I feel like if you strip back the tone and maybe made it like more of like a retro rock sound, like, you know, bands like Graveyard and like Rival Sons, it would probably sound kind of similar to Lucifer. But at the same time, like, if you kept this tone and switched out, you know, the vocalist for a male vocalist, it would kind of sound like Orange Goblin. You know, it's kind of, again, like, it's you know, very meat and potatoes, but like, I can pull so many different bands that it sounds like. And again, what they do to kind of season it really makes it interesting. But the pace of it kind of just keeps you locked in this like perpetual headbang. And I mean, granted, a lot of this stuff, again, very familiar. Like, there were several riffs on here where, like, have I headbanged to you before? Yeah. I don't know. You seem familiar, Riff.
It was instantly familiar. Like, it just reminded me of a ton of stuff I listened to, like, 20 years ago. Like, that's where you've been hiding, huh? And again, I think they're all hiding with Wino. I think Wino's playing a game of hide and seek, and this band found him for a minute, and he was like, all right, here's a couple riffs.
He's secretly on this. I'm reasonably sure.
I'm pretty sure, especially in the Bridge of Evil Remains, where the phaser comes in and gets all like spacey, and even the vocals are kind of stony. And I was like, "You kidnapped Wino, didn't you?"
He's the hidden hand behind this. Now, while I really do like this, again, it does feel like very familiar territory, and you know, that is often kind of a good thing, but sometimes I feel like the well does run a little bit dry on here. Like, certain songs in here just didn't grab me as much. 100 Eyes, while I like, again, a lot of the riffs in it, it's the transitions in it. You know, they don't necessarily land very well. And sometimes the choruses end up being like a little bit flat, like Black Spell, which is just the title of the song being said. I've never been much of a fan of that. I know I'm a big fan of Judas Priest, and they do that a lot, but it's still kind of annoying. And 100 Eyes, again, like, I don't know, there's just something about like how that song just kind of comes together. Like, there's a lot of cool riffs, but it doesn't necessarily gel completely as a song.
Well, because those transitions are so weird, and they are literally out of nowhere. Like, if you're jamming the song, they don't even seem to come in on the right beat. Just like it switches to something, you're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And it doesn't exactly sound right. And then it will immediately transition back to, you know, the original groove, but like, it's just out of nowhere.
Yeah, like the whole first half of it, I mean, it feels like, you know, it's like an old Ozzy song or Ozzy Sabbath. And around the bridge, it kind of just goes off the rails a little bit. And a lot of this is, you know, very much like stay in your lane sort of, you know, metal here. You know, granted, I like it when it does drift it because it gets a little bit interesting. Yeah. You know, case in point, She, absolutely fantastic song on here. But sometimes that adventurousness doesn't necessarily land. And one of the other issues I had with this, while I love the mix of this album, like, it sounds awesome, there is one thing that kind of bothered me a bit, and that was the vocal mix. I think the vocals are solid. She's got a great voice, but it's how they're mixed. They have just like an odd like reverb on them, like she's in a very small room, or she's singing in the shower, or a small storage unit, and it's that small room like reverb, like it's not like a concert hall thing. And I generally like you know, like more live sounding albums. Like, this is exactly what you're gonna get live. I don't feel like you get that exactly with this like vocal mix on here.
Well, it sounds like kind of like you imagine a lounge singer using one of those old school mics, you know, and they've taken just the natural acoustics of this little room and just let that be everything on it. Like, it does sound like she's in the bathroom singing, and it's just bouncing off the walls, and there's not a lot of room for that space to go. And like, because I feel like if you saw this live, I don't think you would get the same vocal effect that's on this record.
Oh, I think it would drone out. Like, it'd be awesome.
Yeah.
And another thing, you know, while I like just the fact that this is just a groovy, riffy, just fun album, I could have used some slower songs to at least accentuate more of the doom vibes. Like that slowdown in Queen of Death, I was like, all right, I want to hear more like that, because that was really good. And outside of Deja Voodoo, a lot of the songs kind of hang in that mid-tempo sort of, you know, realm. Like, there's a couple of faster moments here and there. And maybe a couple of slower moments, but there's not like a couple of purely slower songs to really complement Deja Voodoo.
And the issue with that is they have a lot of riffs that could warrant a slowdown.
Yeah.
Like I know they definitely know how to get dark, and I know they definitely know how to make things sound sinister. So like not having that slowdown is just kind of strange.
Yeah, I feel like this favors like more the classic heavy metal than it does doom, which really isn't much of an issue. But I mean, if you're gonna do both, I kind of need like those slower, moodier jams, like just bring the darkness and the oppression. But overall, I enjoyed this. Like this was just a fun, straightforward, riffy listen. And overall, I'm gonna give it 3.5 stars. I think this is pretty good. I'm probably gonna end up buying a copy and go check out what I missed too, because apparently I have missed quite a bit. Riffs are the main thing on here. And in fact, I would say they steal the show for the most part. Yeah. They are very straightforward. They are very familiar, but it's a good kind of familiar. Like, oh, you remind me of like 8 or 9 different bands that I love. How dare you? And then they season them up with like some creepy melodies on top of them. You know, the haunting vocal performance that kind of gives off, again, that spooky vibe. It's a fun listen. It does kind of drag on certain points, but I mean, overall, I enjoyed most of these songs. I think She is a awesome song. Yeah. The title track is an absolute banger. That riff will probably live rent-free in my head for a little bit.
Yeah, that's a big chugger beast.
If you're a big fan of, a litany of bands, again, like DIO, Strange Highways, specifically that album, pick your favorite wino band and then pick 3 or 4 more of them. It kind of sounds like that too. Obsessed is probably like the big one there, maybe. The Sword, Corrosion of Conformity. I even got some moments that kind of reminded me of Kylesa on here too. And even some Orange Goblin too, both like their earlier stuff and their more recent stuff. Either way, check this out. This was a really fun listen.
I'm going to go ahead and give this 3 stars. I really dug it. These songs are, for the most part, very catchy and, again, very riffy. And the riff choices that they have are complemented by these really awesome harmonized tags that are on most of the songs. I didn't really get to talk about Cold Grave, but there's a really fun, like, up and down sort of riff. It kind of reminded me of going over, like, bunny hills on a roller coaster. Who doesn't like big, beefy, chuggy riffs? They're all over this record, and they're done tastefully for that fact, too. Again, wino comparison, you can't escape the fact that there's Spirit Caravan and Mystic Crew, The Clear Light, and Hidden Hand, and all that shit all over this album, and that's really cool. I did think that a lot of the songs, because they're the same tempo for the most part, get a little, like, samey as far as their presentation is concerned, because it's mostly verse-chorus. Like, there's a couple of bridges, there's a couple of leads, but for the most part, the songs are set up the same, and that's kind of why I give it the 3. I do like songs like She, that is an absolute banger. Cold Grave is pretty awesome. The title track is pretty awesome. It's all really good. It's just not really reinventing the wheel, so to speak. Like, it's presented nicely, but I think they could have done a little bit more here and there just to spice it up, or maybe just add a little bit more variety to things. If you're fans of bands like Baroness, The Sword, definitely Black Sabbath, definitely Ozzy Sabbath too, for that matter, Spirit Caravan, Down 2, things like that. If you dig any of that, I'd recommend just checking this out. Again, I'd never heard it, but it's a jam.
So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up. And if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there. It is also on our channel, up in the banner in the bottom right-hand corner. But if you're looking for Thralls Metal stuff, you have to go to thrallsmetal.com. We have t-shirts, both old and new. The old ones are discounted, provided we have your size. And we even have hats, too. So if you're looking for any of that stuff, click the link down below.
As always, tons of stuff going on at Thralls of Metal. Album reviews, discography rankings, is it metal, is it not metal, states of metal, Nick's never-ending collection updates, live streams that we've been doing a whole bunch. We've been having a lot of fun with those. Discussion topics, we got another one coming up here in a couple days. The crowd response to rough debuts, so that'll be cool. Really, all this stuff we keep doing, we do for you guys. We appreciate you all coming and spending your time with Thralls of Metal and interacting with us and making this a really fun thing to do. I don't know what else I would do with my life at this point, as it's pretty much a 7-day-a-week thing, and yeah, we just keep it going for you. Thank you.
Yeah, you guys absolutely rule. Tons of content coming your way. So one more big thank you because of all your rulage, and we will catch you later.